Welcome to another episode of Threads of Conversation, the show where I ask guests to choose 8 items of clothing that represent different moments in their life and career. Today, my guest is Kristen Naiman, Chief Brand Officer of secondhand luxury resale platform, The RealReal. Over the course of her career, Kristen has done just about every job in fashion. She started off as a stylist, working at Conde Nast's Sports for Women, and then toured with the teenage band Hanson to help define their image. She then moved to Nylon magazine, where she worked as a fashion editor, before joining Gap as a concept consultant in the late 90s. After that, she returned to her roots as a stylist, working as a contributing fashion editor for Paper magazine. Kristen then joined Isaac Mizrahi, where she worked across a variety of roles, staying at the company for nearly 10 years. Her next role at Kate Spade similarly lasted almost a decade, and then in January last year, she joined The RealReal as the company's Chief Creative Officer. Kristen, welcome to Threads of Conversation.
Thank you so much.
So let's go back to the beginning. Your
Sure.
first piece. The piece that reminds you of your childhood. What have you chosen for this category?
So for this, I chose Armani double-breasted, peak collar lapel gray suit.
And how come you chose this piece?
You know, when I think back about my childhood, a lot of my really strong memories of my style developing actually were with my dad. And in my family dynamic, I think both my parents were very interested and kind of astutely aware of the currency and the language that clothing provided. But my mom was very correct about it. She had a approach to it that was very sort of transactional in a way. It was like, I'm going to use clothes in this way to appear like this. And she had a seriousness about it. And my dad had a more playful side about it and a kind of a joyful side. And you know, we lived in this like very preppy kind of place, and we were Jewish. And I think that my parents were sort of using preppy dressing codes to fit in. But every once in a while, my dad would, you know, fall for something. And he always had kind of a cool about him. Even now, he's 82 years old and he like looks like $1 million in a tuxedo. You know,
We'll get him on next.
Yeah, he always had that. And every once in a while, he would sort of go rogue and decide that he like loved something that was not at all within the sort of realm of the style codes of the community that we were living in. And I think it kind of tickled my mom, but also kind of poked her. And I loved it because I felt like the constraint of the way that they used clothes and all of that to fit in or to define themselves I could see it very clearly as a kid. And so when he poked at it, there was something kind of delightful and hilarious about it.
I think it's really amazing. I love that when someone essentially masters a creative language. So like what you were saying about your mum, where she understood how to use clothes. And I'm sure your dad had the same sensibility. And then it's like, once you've mastered the language, you can begin to mess with it a bit.
Totally.
And I think that's when you really see someone's personality, is like how 100%. They slightly break the rules once they know what all of the rules are.
That's exactly right. And my dad is, you know, he was a businessman and we lived in this, you know, this community, but, you know, he had studied jazz guitar and was, really loved jazz and really loved to read. And he had a really like sort of arty side. And he really fostered that side, but he did it in a way that was very private and kind of personal. And then he would sort of merge those things together. For a long time in my childhood, he worked at MTV, and he used to drive this huge yellow Cadillac that my mom thought was like the most hideous thing in the world. And it smelled like Cuban cigars because that's what he smoked. But in his mind, that was like a piece of him. It was like another side of him. And I think they really taught me how to do that. And he specifically taught me how to, like you said, adhere to something and then bend it for both like humor, wit, whim, and joy. Like he was playing when he did that.
I want to hear a bit more about you as a child. So were you shy? Were you extroverted? Were you super creative? Were you always had your nose in a book?
I think have always been a people person. Like I talked. I think I still love to talk, and I've always loved to talk. And so I think as a kid, I wouldn't say that I was either outgoing or shy. I think I was adult. Like I really was the kid who wanted to sit at the adult table and like chat.
Similarly to you, I mean, I grew up in the countryside, and I remember I just thought it was everyone now, especially since the pandemic, they dream of moving to the countryside, green space. Yeah. I thought it was so boring.
Yeah.
I could not wait to get to the city. Totally. And now a lot of my friends are thinking about moving, and I'm like, you cannot get me away from the city. You know, I finally become a grown up, and I love being a grown up.
That's so funny because I similarly was like, hell-bent on being a city kid. And like as soon as I was old enough, like 6th or 7th grade, I started taking the train into the city and walking that stretch of Lower Broadway and like going to the Antique Boutique and going to Canal Jeans. And then I would go to the Angelica and just like see whatever random film was there. Like I just was like voracious for that.
That takes us really nicely onto your next piece, which is the piece that reminds you of your career. So what have you chosen?
So I chose this black Lanvin. It's like a scuba material. It's like, you know, Albert Elbaz, like heyday black Lanvin sheath dress. Very classic even for him, because I think he, you know, it's like just a tank sheath with these kind of thick darts and a little bit of a ribbon going down the back, tight with a zipper up the back.
You described it as very not me, which I'm interested in.
Yes.
So what caused you to buy this dress that was very not your usual style?
Well, so part of why it's not me is because I really don't wear black. But the reason I bought it and chose it was that I had been working with Isaac Mizrahi, who was subsequently became my boss for almost 10 years. And I had been working with him freelance for about a year. First, we had made a book together that was a How to Have Style book, which is sort of how I met him. And then he pulled me in to start working on this project he was doing for Liz. He got hired to be the creative director of Liz Claiborne. And so he pulled me in to do that. And so he started pulling me in to do his sort of runway shows. And after about a year, he was like, you should just come work for me full time. And there's something, Isaac is very old school and wonderful in this way of being like, he's really like, romantic in the way that he courts people that he loves. So like as we were in this hiring process, it was like a massive box of chocolates would show up at my house, or like I love seltzer. I drink cans of seltzer and it's like all very specific. And it would be like 2 cases of seltzer would show up right before a fashion show, or like, you know, a piece of art, you know, whatever. And we really did have, I think he and I have had and still have and had at that time for sure, a kind of creative connection. And I think those can be like borderline romantic. They're not romantic in the love sense, but they're romantic in the sense that I think when you really creatively connect with someone, you like end up with all of these really strong feelings about them. So he offered me a job to come work full time for him, and to celebrate it, he and his husband Arnold invited me and my ex-husband Keith out for dinner to La Grenouille. It all felt like super grown up. And I think that sometimes in a moment like that, you're like, am I going to dress for the place and the occasion, or am I going to dress in a way that's truly myself? So I was like going to wear this crazy lame leopard print, like vintage dress that I had that was really like ankle length and kind of a gown, but the way I wore it was like with a belt and some boots. And like, I was like all the way up to that place by like in the afternoon of this dinner. And then I was like, I can't do that. And I like went out and bought this like Audrey Hepburn black dress, which is in some ways dressing for your audience. Like I was dressing for him because I think that's such a big part of what his aesthetic is. And it was dressing for the occasion. It was dressing for the like life I was stepping into, or the life I thought I was stepping into. And funny enough, I've kept the dress all these years, although I'm an editor. I'm not a archiver. I've kept the dress all these years, but I really rarely wear it. And I never 100% feel like myself in it. But it really does come in handy for very specific things every once in a while.
It's like your Clark Kent sort of Spidey suit for very certain missions.
That's right. That's exactly right. And it was a delight to buy it. I had almost never, you know, I think I learned like what I was saying from my dad. My parents were scrappy and they were very savvy. And like, I think I understood and learned that style is not necessarily connected to like walking into the fanciest place and buying the most expensive thing. Like, I think I understood that very young. And I think we had a sense of like being clever and savvy about how you got all of this stuff. But that afternoon, I like walked into Barney's and dropped the money on this like full price dress. And I think there was something also about doing that is a certain kind of act of empowerment or, ritual. There's a ritual to doing that. Like, this matters.
It's interesting, something you said there, it kind of reminds me of what we were talking about before with this like learning the language and then being able to play with the language. It's like, I feel like when you're sort of working in fashion, you feel like you're working up to being that person who then buys the thing in the store from the brand. And actually the people that I always, whose style and fashion language I always admire the most are the people that are like, no, I interviewed, I don't know if you know Dara from Interview Magazine, and she was talking about, she has all of these little thrift store buttons that she always puts with her. And it's those sort of almost not forbidden fruits, but the kind of thing where it might come from a bargain bin.
Totally.
And it completes the look.
And I think that's what's, to me, very poignant about that story, and still feels that way, which is that has always been my truth of clothes, and that's always what I've come back around to. And I think there's a real vulnerability in being like, I need to put on the costume. In order to be Spider-Man, I have to wear the suit. And at some point, you're like, no, I'm Spider-Man no matter what I'm in. I'm like, it's me. It's not the thing. It's not the clothes. But that's a journey I think you take and something you weave through. And I think there is more of a desire to put on some armor when what you're stepping into has stakes or feels threatening. And I think, and the job wasn't threatening in a way that it was exciting, but meaning you could fail or whatever. And so I always like to honor those moments, because I think they're just as important as the power moments, because they're the moments where you connect with like what is actually tender and sort of vulnerable about dressing.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I got my first corporate job, and I'd been doing modelling for years and then a bit of journalism, but, journalism kind of from my bedroom.
Yeah.
And I was working in a big e-commerce company. I had no idea how it worked. I felt so out of, I'd spend meetings like nodding, and in my head just being like, what are they, there's so many acronyms, what are they talking about? And I started wearing loads of suits for exactly that reason. I thought, I am going to look like I am the CEO, even though I'm sort of lowly newbie. Yeah. And it really helped me walk the walk. And I always feel like there's a sort of, there's always a tension between the fake it till you make it, because I don't think that works in all scenarios. But if you pretend something, you can then kind of grow into it.
It's so true. And what you just said really lands for me, because I think that some of knowing the difference between those two things is actually really paying attention to like whether or not it's something that you actually want and you're working through with yourself, your own relationship to it, or whether you're putting something on in order to be something that you feel like you have to but don't really feel connected to. Like some of it has to do with that. Like what's the underlying reason? Are you using the thing as a tool, or are you using it as like a costume or a way to hide? And I think it's a very fine line, and actually goes back to mostly something deeper about knowing yourself in any given moment.
Well, I definitely want to ask you about finding that sense of self. But at first, I just want you to give a little context for your career. So can you take us on a whistle-stop tour from you grew up in Connecticut, is that right?
In Rye, which is very close to Connecticut.
So being trapped in Rye, being desperate to be a grown-up and getting to the city, how did you get there, and how did you get to where you are now as Chief Brand Officer of the RealReal?
Yeah. I had a complicated relationship to school. I really loved school and I loved to learn, but school wasn't always easy for me. I think I was restless in school and had like what would now probably be considered like some sort of learning things. And I think I managed that by being extraordinary or trying to be extraordinary in these other ways, So I left school after 11th grade. And at some point I was in school in New York, and I had a very dear friend who's still one of my dearest friends, who was a friend from a writing class, and he started working at Paper. He was a year ahead of me. He started working at Paper right out of school, writing music reviews. And I was out of school for a semester just bartending, and he was like, hey, do you want to assist a stylist? You might really like it. And I was like, what's a stylist? I didn't even really know what it was. But I got sort of pulled into this world of Conde Nast, like early 90s Conde Nast. We had a bunch of friends who were working at this startup called Conde Nast Sports for Women, and I got pulled into that world and started working in that and stayed in it for a whole bunch of years. From there, I went and I was doing a bunch of freelance sort of like styling, and I met a creative director at a record company, and I was doing a bunch of little bands for her, and they had an A&R guy who would come and discover people, and they'd send them to me and be like, could you take them shopping for 2 days? And I was always really great at like figuring out who someone was really quickly, understanding them, connecting with them, and then helping them pull out of themselves how they wanted to look as it related to what they wanted to express creatively. And then that same person, that same creative director at the ad agency, called me one day and she's like, I have kind of a crazy assignment for you. Because I had been doing all these like little indie bands, like these groovy, kind of cool young bands. She's like, I have a funny assignment for you, but I just have this feeling it would be perfect. She's like, do you know the band Hanson? And I was like, vaguely, I know the band Hanson. And they had come off this record called Mbop, which was like this boy band huge smash, crazy success. And the record company was trying to evolve them. It had been a couple of years before, and they wanted to take them from being these boy band stars to being these like rock stars. But I met them and we really got on, and we spent a year basically doing what we were talking about, kind of like, and they were at this very tender age because they were in their late teenage years. They were 19, 17, and 14. So it wasn't really just about figuring out what their image needed to be, even though that was a big piece of it because they were public figures. It was also about them figuring out who they were. Like, who were they going to be as men? And I feel like we spent this year like working through that. And I still joke with them now when I see them that like the sort of lanes we kind of established for them, which we really worked through by figuring out what they liked and didn't like, is kind of still what they all do. So I did that for a while. And then through that, I had worked on a jean jacket for Hanson. I had hand embroidered this jean jacket for them, and it was on the cover of a magazine, and it was a vintage Gap jacket, and it was during like the 1969. It was just at the end of Gap khakis, and sort of like 1969 vintage Levi's. And someone from the Gap concept team called me and was like, "Where'd you get that jacket?" And I was like, "I made it." Like, what do you mean you made it? And I was like, "Oh, I embroidered it, whatever." And so like, do you want to come in and help us? So I went in and started working on concept at the Gap. And I think the concept at the Gap was really brain expanding and eye-opening, because what I realized, especially at that time, and I think it is really different now, the way that trends, if you even want to call them that, get made, or the way that currents of fashion get made, come from so many different directions. It's like an ocean that's like splashing in every different way. But at that time, it was much more about these companies taking the cultural temperature and kind of understanding how people wanted to look. And if they were doing a really good job doing that, then they were making product that reflected how people wanted to look and reflected how people wanted to feel. And then many people wanted to look like that. And I thought that that was like a collective social version of this individual thing I had been doing for people. So I started doing that with them. And from there, it was like, I kind of played around for a lot of years between all of those different things. It wasn't any one track. It's like I did some styling, I did some individual people, I did a bunch of concept work, I did shoots. So I did that for a bunch of years. And then in the sort of mix of all of that, Mickey Boardman, who was the longtime editor of Paper magazine, one of them, called me and was like, "Isaac Mizrahi, do you know him? He needs someone to help him make this book about how to have style. And I just think you guys would be like really perfect together." Mickey's been like a guardian angel in my career. Like, I think all of us have those where he like pops in at different moments and he's like, "Have you ever thought about this?" And then all of a sudden you're like on this path.
I have one friend who, without her, I would never have made a single pound.
Yeah.
She was like post-modeling. She honestly was like, "You should do this. You should apply for this. I'll introduce you to this person."
We all need those people. So he introduced me to Isaac, and that's really when my like sort of executive career took off. And that's kind of how I got on the road that I'm on now. And it's been 20 years of now, pretty much, because I was about 10 at Isaac and about 10 at Kate Spade, of doing these kind of creative jobs that were very much about helping organizations express what their brand is and what their brand is all about. And I think that brands in many ways behave like people, in the sense that they have to be both authentic to what they are, but also evolve with the times in a way that makes them engaged and keep growing, as opposed to getting stuck in one particular place. And I think that act of creating brand and keeping it alive and dynamic and interested and engaged really does have this like direct line back to this original thing that I loved, which is like, how do you do that with people?
I want to move on to your next piece, which is the piece that reminds you of a high. And it's really interesting because you've had such an amazing and continue to have such an amazing career, and the piece that you chose actually has got nothing to do with your career.
Yeah.
So tell me what you've chosen for this category.
So I chose this brown strapless Erez bathing suit, which is like my favorite bathing suit. And I've actually had a couple of them. They last a certain amount of time, and then I buy another one. And yeah, that's what I chose.
Mm-hmm. And what does it remind you of? Why did you choose it?
I chose it because it reminds me of being at the beach with my daughter, which I think is my like most kind of joyful place. And we've spent a lot of time together at the beach, she and I, and I think there's something about that bathing suit. And also I think bathing suits are really interesting kinds of garments, because you can be so bent out of shape about like, do I look good in this? Do I look good in that? Am I thin enough? Does it fit me in this way? Is it like right for the place that I'm going? And I think the beach is like the great equalizer in a lot of ways. It's like, once you get to the beach, it's all good. Everyone looks like $1 million. It's like all the different body shapes and all the different like, It's just there's something about a beach that's like everything is kind of cool, you know? And the more people just like let it hang and let it be, kind of the more natural and confident and gorgeous and authentic that they look. And I think that the beach for me really represents that. And, you know, she and I have like all different kinds of funny rituals at the beach. Like we pack a bunch of food and we play cards, and like, it's just my most relaxed, authentic, genuine, kind of joyful self. And I think that's like the ultimate high.
I think you're definitely right, because if you think about people that come from more beachy cultures, like think about how body confident like Brazilians are, for example. It's like, and I actually interviewed a designer called Jawara Aline for another episode, who's a Jamaican designer, and he was saying that he feels like because Caribbean women have so much, you know, they're at the beach so much more, they have their body on show, there's much less of this like hang up or this desire to like cover up or conceal, or, you know, they have an inherent confidence.
I think it's the covering that makes us self-conscious, actually. It's the attempt to cover that does that. And I think there's like something very beautiful about that. And I always feel amazing in that bathing suit, no matter where I'm at, because of what I'm doing in it.
Speaking of highs, I'm going to go back to your career now. You've been at the RealReal for a year and a half now, just about. What's been like a real high for you so far, or a project that you were like, I really want to do this, and you've seen it take off?
So we did something last year on Canal Street that was called Ask Yourself What's Real, and it was about fakes and the sort of market of fakes. And it was, again, like it came in a very organic way. And then the way we made it was both organic and very quick, but also really hard, because I think the other thing about making something really good is that if you aren't worried about how it's going to go, and if you don't feel worried that like it could go really well or it could really not go well, then you probably aren't really taking a big enough risk. But we took a really big risk with that project, and it was just amazing to see it out in the world. I think that's the other thing with creativity is like once you make it, it's not really yours anymore. It's like the world's to do with it what they will. Any kind of creativity, even a kind of commercial creativity like that. And it was really amazing to see what it did and how it came to life and how it really took on its own form.
What is your creative process like? How do you come up with a good idea?
So I think that's changed a lot over time and as I've evolved kind of as a leader. But for me, for sure, I'm not someone who like goes into a room and like needs to like completely work by myself and then come back. I really need a room full of people and all of us like talking and batting stuff around. And for me, it is always in conversation and out in the world, looking at things, absorbing things, and talking to people about them, that all of my ideas come. I think I'm very associative. Like one person says something and then I say another, and we get to some place together. And I think that's why I love working in these teams, and I love working actually in these sort of business environments, because it's about a group of people coming together. It's not actually about one individual person. And I think that is one of the things that's evolved over time. I think when I was younger, it felt like, here's my idea, now everybody get behind it and let's do it, you know? And now I feel like it's much more about like, let's let everybody in the room throw out a million ideas. And my job as the leader in this room is actually to hear it and to pause us when something really amazing is said and be like, what about that? Let's pay attention to that. What if we go deeper at that? And sort of like be the conductor of this conversation and sort of push us towards the places that really feel like they have a lot of energy. And that's what happened with that Canal Street. We were in a brainstorm we were talking about, the RealReal is like the absolute leader in authentication. And in fact, they were way before my time, visionary in the sense that they understood that authentication was going to be a massive component of how luxury resale was done. And yet, in the couple years before I was at the RealReal, for a variety of different reasons, there had been a bunch of kind of chatter on social about the RealReal selling fakes. And it was something that we wanted to try and address and talk about, and do it in an authentic, open way that was like, let's actually really talk about this and talk about the whole range of it. So we were in a brainstorm talking about that. And one of the writers on our team, this woman, Kate, was like, we should just throw up a store on Canal Street. And I was like, yes, we should. Like, it was like that thing where it was like, she said it as an aside. She said it kind of as a joke. It was really something that could have just passed by in that moment, and we could have just like let it flitter off. But as soon as she said it, it was like, oh my God, that's so brilliant, you know? And so we sort of said, well, what if we did try and do that? And that's really where it came from.
I feel like that talk about addressing something negative takes us quite nicely to your next piece. So this is the piece that reminds you of a low. Can you remember what you've chosen for this category?
Yes. So it's a Kenzo, vintage Kenzo, like original era Kenzo shirt and pair of sort of wide leg culotte pants in this like very beautiful print.
And why did you choose this to remind you of a low?
It was a low that I think through the act of buying this thing turned into a moment of like joy. And I think that at its best, fashion can do that. So I was splitting up from my ex-husband and my daughter was maybe almost 2. And it was kind of the dead of winter. And I called my dad and I was like, I really need some sun. And he was like, let's just buy some tickets and go somewhere. So me and my daughter and my dad went to we looked and it was like we could get these like super cheap tickets to go to Fort Lauderdale. So we went to Fort Lauderdale and like stayed at this funny hotel. We were kind of hanging around and I was in really a state. Like I was going through this divorce. I had this tiny little kid and it was like this thing of like, put me in a sun chair, put my dad in the pool with my daughter and like let him do that so I can just like lie here and just like be where I am, you know?
In the RS bathing suit.
Yeah.
It's like, we can get back there.
We can do it. And, so we were driving from Fort Lauderdale down to Miami. I don't even remember why. And I remember that there used to be this really amazing vintage store in Miami called C. Madeline that was on the way from kind of Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale down to Miami. And the woman who owned it had like a direct line into, I think, probably all of these like society ladies' Palm Beach closets. And there was amazing stuff in this place. So we were driving and I was like, oh my God, we're right near C. Madeline's. Let's go. And my dad was like, okay. You know, he was sort of like, oh, all right. So we go to see Madeline's and we walk in and she was like this real character. She was a super character. And she and my dad like immediately totally hit it off and started like laughing and joking and kind of teasing each other. And my daughter was like running around this store. And I spent like, I don't know, whatever it was, an hour looking through the stuff and, you know, trying different things on for them. And in hindsight, I could see that it was like a really very transformative moment. It was like I was, you know, really going through something. You could see that I was going through something physically. It's like divorce is intense in that way. And I think it was a moment of like ushering in some kind of like next phase. Like, what are these clothes going to be? What's it going to be? And the way that it created like a convivial, joyful energy between all of us, the woman who owned the place and my dad and my daughter. And then I bought this outfit, this Kenzo outfit, and I wore it through like the next 10 years of my life. And I think that at its best, like you were talking about earlier, clothes can really do that. Just the straight up joy and fun of doing it, but also the kind of like paying some moment of attention, and especially like with others, you know, like there was a moment in that shopping experience where my dad and C. Madeline were like joking around about what I should be wearing. This thing is sort of like flowy and loose. And she was like, are you kidding me? She needs like a tight little black dress. And my dad was like, you know, we were like batting it around in a funny way. And it just took a moment of like struggle and turned it into a moment of transformation. And I think clothes do that.
So much of what we both have in common in terms of how we think about clothes is the way that they're almost like a vessel for emotional moments, for conversation with other people. And yet we're in a very like brand focused moment right now in fashion. When I say brand, I don't mean brand in the way that you were talking about it in terms of a personality, in terms of, I'm thinking like logo and almost like a tick in a box as opposed to this sort of analog signal. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that is happening? Can you talk about that?
I think that we have as a culture, I think that it got a lot easier to make clothes and to make stuff in general. It's not just clothes, but that's our business. It got a lot easier to make stuff over the last 50 years, the way that we produce things. And as a result, we could produce much more of it, much cheaper, much more quickly. I think it's very complicated sociologically because you have, it's like it was an access to a kind of abundance that wasn't previously accessible to people who didn't have the means to have that kind of abundance. But in the machine that was then created out of that, we got into a consumption culture that is like voracious. And it's voraciously fueled by the need for companies to continue to grow, make more, money, grow. And you could talk about that. We could talk about that forever, and that has all of its own stuff. But the collateral damage that's done to our relationship to actually what clothes and style do to us is the sweet spot of what I'm interested in. Because to me, like you were saying, that clothes, style, really the aesthetic world you create around you, there's a lot of power in that. There's a reason that like beauty and the creation of beauty is like one of our oldest things. It's ancient, and it's an ancient impulse. And to express ourselves through the materiality around us is an ancient impulse. And that we have conflated with status and consumption and money. But I don't think that it fundamentally has to be or is. And I'm interested in sort of like teasing those things apart. And I think that we've arrived there in the fashion business because it's the assumption of that's what makes good business. If people feel insatiable desire for your logo, then you grow.
And I think I'm not trying to say that like brands are or logos are bad, kind of again referring to what we've been talking about, where you learn a language and then you can bring it into play with it. It's, you know, the best dressers, they know exactly when to put the logo or when to have the classic piece that is recognizable and how to pair that with the piece that is vintage or sort of. So it's not that I'm saying that, you know, I think logos shouldn't exist, but it's been very interesting to watch how, I don't know, I think it has something to do, to be honest, from my perspective, with the way that digital culture is going and us constantly having our rat brains sort of pressed for serotonin and things, because we want a very quick reward, and we're like, oh, we see the logo, it's immediately recognizable, we understand what that means, it's immediately legible, I put it on, and that sort of, it appeals to that 2-second attention span that we're all being sort of funneled into.
I love that. I've never thought about it quite that way before, but I hear that, and it feels like what you're saying is that it's a lot less work. It's like a lot less work to do that than to really, I think that there's a certain amount of knowing yourself that has to happen to be able to connect with clothing in a way that feels really true to you. And there's a certain amount of practice. Like my daughter has recently like really gotten into thrifting. She's 13. And when we were first doing it together, she'd be like, well, you're so good at this. Like, you know, why, like, oh, she'd get like annoyed or whatever. And I'm like, I've been practicing doing this for such a long time. And actually what you're doing is knowing how to listen to the voice in your head when it's like that or that. And that takes a certain amount of calm and like slowness and self-knowledge that I totally agree is not really what we're fostering in our kind of like, as you said, serotonin-driven brains.
The next piece is the piece that makes you feel a part of something.
Oh, yeah.
So what have you chosen for this category?
So I chose this Hermes scarf that I have that was owned before me by Joan Didion.
As in it belonged to her?
It belonged to her.
Oh, wow. Okay,
Yes.
So tell the story. How did you come across this piece?
So I came across it. So I love her. And actually, you know what? I'll amend that. I think as time goes on, I have a more and more complicated relationship with Joan Didion and what she represents and how she thought about things. But I think that there is Joan Didion is the kind of writer where there is culturally, there was always sort of like a cult of women who loved Joan Didion, and you kind of felt kindred immediately in knowing like another Joan Didion lover, kind of. And she's a writer that I've always loved and admired. And I was working on a writing project. It was a couple of years ago, and I was just about to start showing it to people. And I was kind of nervous about it and nervous about doing that and putting something into the world in that way. And I had gone to the Manhattan Vintage Show for work. I was doing a bunch of concept research, and I saw a vintage dealer that I really love and have known for a bazillion years. And I walked into her booth, and I put my hand on this dress, and I was sort of like looking at this dress. And she walked over, and she's like, "Oh my God, that's so funny. That dress actually belonged to Joan Didion." And I was like, "Really?" And she was like, "Yeah." And it was right around the time of that auction of all of Joan. She had just passed, and there was this auction of all of her stuff upstate. And I was like, "Was it from the auction?" And she's like, "No, there was a bunch of stuff that they like deemed not sort of like, important enough or whatever to put in an auction. I think a lot of the clothes were in that." She was like, "So there was this private sale, and I bought a bunch of her stuff. I actually have a ton of her stuff." And she started walking me around the booth and showing me all of her stuff. And I had this like sort of lightning feeling moment of like, I need to buy a couple of Joan's pieces and like wear them into some of these meetings that I have to go to. It was like that thing of the way that objects and stuff hold energy and the sort of icy power of Joan Didion's presence was like a good antidote to my anxiety. And so I chose a couple things of hers from that. And it was like a pair of pants and this kind of jacket and this Hermes scarf. And I'm not an Hermes person, really. Like, I didn't own really any other Hermes. It's a little like sort of buttoned up for me. But I really liked the pattern on the scarf and I loved the colors. It was like very much in my palette. And funny enough, I wear it like an insane amount. Like, I wear it so much. I wear it like wrapped on my head like this because I sometimes do that. I wear it wrapped as a scarf. Sometimes it's just crumpled in a ball in my bag. I like take it to swimming at the gym and like throw it on afterwards and it gets all wet. Like, I wash it. I'm not precious about it at all. But I think that there is this like little piece of somebody you've once admired and the idea that you have some kind of energetic connection to them that I think we have that a lot with objects. And I think that's what heirlooms are all about. And I think that's what's nice about knowing the provenance of certain things.
I find it interesting to say you have an not increasingly complicated relationship with Joan Didion, but it's that thing, isn't it, where I'm similar to you. I work across a few different creative fields, but I am probably originally a writer, and I love to read and I love writing, and I feel like your favorite writers, they sort of almost are like a parental figure, but similarly with your parents, as you get older and you learn more about life and about them, and they start to equalize, and you think, oh, actually I see where, it's like someone like Susan Sontag, who is like a super problematic character but also still so brilliant, and you have to love the bits of them that are great and make peace with the stuff where you're like, oh, actually, Speaking of writing and voice, something that I've really noticed is that the RealReal's tone of voice is a very distinctive part of its identity. So I went to the store yesterday and I was looking at the captions on the mirrors, the way you talk on social, and the sort of witty wordplay that is across the website and the campaigns. Is that something that you really fostered? Can you talk about how you develop that and how you work with it?
So when I arrived at the RealReal, there was a lot of language. I think there was a bedrock and a basis of a love of that kind of play in the language. But in the couple of years before I got there had become a lot of very transactional language and sort of dry and clinical kind of cold language. Because I think there's something incredibly rigorous about the RealReal and scientific about the way that the work is done there. And it's an incredible part of what the RealReal is all about. When you talk to people in that way, it doesn't always capture their feeling or their emotion the way that you were talking about earlier. It doesn't make them feel what you're doing. It makes them know what you're doing. And sometimes it's the difference between like talking at someone versus talking with someone. But I noticed that in the language of the RealReal, there was this real heritage of like this kind of clever, playful language. So we started moving a lot of that more transactional language towards the more playful language. Because I think that good brands do have to be, especially now, have to be talking with people. They can't be talking at people because people are inundated with stuff. And I think a big way to engage people is through that kind of play.
I also have this, it comes from I studied art history at university, and it comes from me like looking and analysing. I want to ask you if this hypothesis that I have is true. So I was looking at all of the RealReal's collateral and thinking about the overall creative in preparation for this interview. And I noticed that a lot of the art direction is quite clean and quite white. And obviously, not obviously, but one of the main things that holds people back from shopping secondhand is that they think that things are going to be dirty or they're not clean. Or is that a conscious link in terms of keeping it looking really clean to almost reject that stereotype?
So I think that in that direction, the very clean white direction, although I like it and think it really suits the RealReal, is way pre-exists me. And I think the original intention of it really lands for me, or at least what I think the original intention of it was, which is or what I've always assumed it was, which is to elevate that product to the same level of like luxury status as it originally had, and not to look at it as dirty or secondhand. So I think that's connected to what you're saying, but kind of adjacent. It's kind of saying this thing is just as valuable, just as desirable for being secondhand as it would have been prior, maybe more desirable. I think that's one thing. And then I think the second thing is that to me, one of the magic things about the RealReal, and I think thrifting in general, but especially the RealReal's presentation, is that I think people go deep and hard on finding the things that they like. And I think it's a digital, virtual way to do the thing you were talking about earlier with thrifting, which is like how you hone your radar. And to me, the RealReal is really about that. And I think the sort of narrative storytelling sometimes runs interference with that because you're kind of telling people what the context is as opposed to people choosing it and creating it.
Let's move on to the piece that reminds you of a great party. So what have you chosen for this category?
So I chose this red kind of floral caftan and pants that are a set.
Are you a party animal?
Not really, actually. I love a dinner party. I like the joie de vivre of all of that.
I feel like I listened to an interview with you where you were talking about something to do with creative strategy being like a dinner party. Was that it? Can you just explain that analogy?
Sure. So I also love to cook and I love to throw dinner parties. And I think that when I really started paying attention to fashion shows, it was in the period when I was working with Isaac, when I first started working with Isaac. And I started to pay attention to fashion shows the way like a professional pays attention. I think I'd always paid attention to them as a person who loves clothes, and I'd be like, oh, I love this brand or that brand. But this was like thorough. Like you would look at every single show and really analyze them and think about who was interesting and why and what that meant about where culture was headed. And I would do a certain amount of that in some of the concept work that I did, but really when I got to Isaac, I felt like it was part of my job to be like thorough about that. And I think it was also specifically working with him because he had been like the absolute darling of 90s New York fashion in so many ways. And working with somebody, and he's an unbelievably original, iconoclastic, creative person, and just brewing and bubbling with ideas. And one of the things that I started to notice was that we would do something and it would really be some clever, excellent thing, like using, it was like a runway show about Central Park, and he would use like, a nail that you might like find getting stuck in the bottom of your shoe as the heel of a high heel or whatever. There were all these different sort of like real ideas that he would have about stuff. And we would do it and no one would necessarily pay attention to it or notice it. And then you'd see it like 2 or 3 weeks later in Paris in a slightly different form on a runway, and someone would get like a whole ton of attention for it. And I started to think about how interesting that was, because it isn't solely the idea, it's also like who holds sway over the conversation and at what time. And also that there is a certain amount of rhythm to that I think in the fashion industry we like to resist, which is like, oh my God, Alessandro Michele should just hold sway forever. Like that would be Gucci's dream. But you're like, that is not the actual rhythm of things. The rhythm of things is much more like a dinner party. Like a bunch of people sitting around a dinner party talking. And, this person over here is talking and they've been talking for like a really long time. And you're like, okay, that person's going to like keep talking, whatever. And then this other person over here has been kind of quiet and watching and studying and whatever. Just as that person finishes, that person chimes in and no one's really heard from them in a while. And they say this really interesting original thing, but they say it in a way that people kind of notice, and they notice them. And so their eyes like shift over there and they start paying attention to that one. And the way that sort of the dynamics of who holds sway in a conversation at any given moment, it felt very much the way that fashion worked. And that the expectation that one person should be able to hold, or one person, one company, one brand should be able to hold sway forever, like resists the natural rhythm of banter and the natural rhythm of what I think fashion really is all about, which is like a conversation inside of culture about what is relevant, how we want to feel, how we want to look, and who we are at any given moment. And I think there is a certain amount of passing around that has to happen for that to be like, if you go to a dinner party and it's only 2 people talking the whole time, everyone's sleeping by the end of it. But if you go and everybody's popcorning around and this person says this and that one says that, then it is really delightful and dynamic and you tend to learn more.
And then there's always the person that like throws this sort of, the hot topic or the controversial thing, and then to watch everyone, see how everyone deals with it.
Or the person who says something really like that everyone's like, oh, what is that? It's like because it feels shocking at first. And I think that's the other thing about fashion too, that's like a lot of times when someone first throws a new idea out there, people are like, ooh, that's ugly, or that's, I don't know about that. And then like your eye gets used to it. And I think that happens in conversation too. Like someone says something kind of confrontational or provocative. And sometimes it's just provocative to be provocative. And I think people see through that in both fashion and in conversation. And you're like, oh, whatever. But if they say something provocative that actually pokes something true, then it's like the eye or the ear kind of adjusts.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that thought and feeling of being disruptive also, that describes the RealReal as a disruptive company. Who is a disruptive, either a brand or a creative that you admire?
I think for me, what I love in disruptiveness is when somebody takes something that's always been and gives it a new delivery system. So I think Airbnb in its original form, not necessarily at this moment, but in its original form, it was like for time immemorial, it's like people traveled through places and they needed to stop and rest and stay somewhere. And they pushed it through a modern delivery mechanism. And to me, that is what creativity and reinvention and disruptiveness is all about. It's not necessarily about saying we are going to operate differently. It's more like, what is the right delivery system for that? And Substack is an example of something that I think is really like that and really interesting. Like, it reinvented long-form content. We've had long-form content as long as we've had the printing press, but what is the delivery system for that long-form content? And I think there was a period in media where it was like, no one's going to read anything long form, like no way. And now it's like, no, people are paying through paywalls, multiple paywalls, to read this long form content because they figured out a delivery system that was in sync with our times and how we wanted to consume that particular thing. It's about understanding what people want and understanding what the moment is and how you offer that thing in this moment.
It's interesting you mentioned Substack because, I know an area that you have, there's the RealReal and the Real Girl, Mysterious Real Girl.
Yes.
And I think you guys are doing it really well. I am interested in watching brands join Substack because I think that sometimes it can be a little short-sighted where it's like you already have CRM channels and you don't want it to just become another, slightly less branded CRM channel. Let's move on to the piece that makes you feel sexy, which we're actually both wearing. Yes. So what did you choose for this category?
Just a cream-colored silk shirt.
And why did you choose this?
Sexiness is really a very endlessly morphing, moving target. Like, what makes you feel sexy and why has so much more, I think, really to do with like where you're at in any given moment. And for me, no matter where I've been in all of my different evolutions, if I put on like a kind of drapey, cream-colored silk shirt, I feel like myself. And I feel kind of like unadorned, but in a way that it's like I'm neither like too covered or not covered enough. I like things that are sort of slouchy and kind of like you can just push it up and be a little bit messy with it, but it still has a little bit of like elegance to it or something. And I think for me, that is often the moments you feel the most sexy is when you're just like, are who you are.
I'm going to do a bit of a sort of interviewer's reach here. So sexiness links to a topic of eroticism, which I want to talk about in the sense of, I feel like I've read quite a few think pieces over the last maybe year or so, which is talking about this lack of eroticism in culture. And that's not in a sexual sense, that's more in a sense of sensuality, intuition, those sort of softer, the sort of lifeblood qualities. And one of the things, bear with me here, that I feel like relates to this is this friction between like data and instinct when it comes to businesses, and the fact that we are in quite an algorithmically driven moment where we have so much data at our disposal, and it's like, okay, well, what does the data say? What performed already? What was good? How can we replicate that? How can we make sure that we take no risks because we base it all on this knowledge and these numbers that we have? I want to ask about your relationship with using data. That sounds like a GDPR question. I mean more in the sense of making data-driven decisions in your creative process and what the tension between intuition and numbers is for you.
Look, I think that data is really powerful in the sense that it's a lot of information and a lot of insight. And some of the very best professional relationships I've had have been with like the CMO at Kate Spade or our head of brand strategy right now, where they are what I would consider really good at reading the tea leaves. Data is only as good as the person reading it because data needs to be interpreted, and it's only as good as the person asking the question. What question did you ask? What did you get back? And how are you going to interpret what you see? That to me is already like an intuitive and instinctual relationship to data, and people that are good at using and reading data know how to do that. For me, if they can then translate that into some kind of insight, that touches me, or that sounds right to me, or resonates with me, or lands for what I already intuitively feel, then I can take that and use it to make something that speaks to people. And I think that can be very powerful. So I'm not against data in any way, but I think that data has to be a tool. It can't be the answer. And I think that what's happened with data is that for a long time, the sort of like magical, unknowable, lightning in a bottle aspect of creativity was very threatening to people that were driving businesses. And I don't mean that hyperbolically. Like, I don't think they always felt threatened by it, but I think that it's not reliable. It feels unreliable because, like, what is it right? Is it not right? Like, how? And I don't believe that it's unreliable, but I think that's what it feels like because they don't know how to quantify it. I think data has provided this ability to quantify it. And in providing that ability, it's made it feel like, well, maybe we don't need the creativity. Like, maybe we don't need the intuition because we have the facts. And I think that's where data has gone like wildly wrong because I actually think that data is only more information to fuel really incredible creativity. But if you don't use it to fuel the creativity, but rather use it as the insert replacement for creativity, then you've sort of squashed what is most important about creativity and brand work, especially, which is that you're putting out into the world a feeling that other people have and identify with and connect to.
You thought you were going to talk about sexy clothes, and I took it in a totally different direction. We have got to your last piece. This is the one that got away. So what got away? And are you going to find it on the RealReal?
Well, I'm trying. But we had done a shoot here for like some press stuff. And there was this Attersea dress that I loved that I wore in this shoot. And we sent it back. We sent all the clothes back in at the end of the shoot. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go buy that dress. And I waited like literally 14 hours or something. And I went back on there and they had checked it back in and somebody already bought it. And I was like, it wasn't even like, I don't want to buy this dress. It was just like, I was doing 3 other things and didn't get there. And I was like, I really wanted that dress. It would have been like the perfect answer for 5 different things that I have to do this summer. So I'm just like patiently waiting for it to come back on. But yeah.
Is there anything else that is on your obsessions list?
So this is sort of against my better judgment because I tend to try and do things on the RealReal. Like, I like to buy winter stuff in summer and summer stuff in winter. I think you should buy off season and sell in season. I think that's one of the great
that's the
hacks of the RealReal. But I really need a new sandal/summer shoe game. So I have a bunch of things going on there, but I really haven't landed yet on exactly what it's going to be.
Then lastly, I mean, you kind of gave us something there, but do you have any hot tips or tricks for shopping or selling or using the RealReal?
Another one is moving quickly, like understanding what is going to stay and what is going to go is a little bit of an art form, and watching that and moving quickly when you need to, I think is a real lesson that only is learned when you've been burned a couple times. And I think the best way to do that is to search and see how many of those other things are on there. Like, how often does it come on? Is a really good one to watch for. Like, are there 15 Cartier watches? Because you probably have a hot second to do that. Or is there only one of those things? There was a Robe backpack that I bought, and there have only been 3 of them like on there in the whole whatever history of the search thing. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to do that now.
I love it. I feel like this makes me feel better about, and I'm sure all the other RealReal obsessives, about spending so much time on the app and the sites. It's like all of these, they're big life lessons, you know? Buy low, sell high, you know, go with your intuition when you know that the time is right. I'm like, you know, the RealReal is teaching me life lessons. It's not about shopping. Kristen, thank you so much for being on the show and for sharing your threads of conversation.
My pleasure. It was great to chat with you.
Woohoo! Thanks for listening to this episode of Threads of Conversation. A reminder that you can find pictures of Kristen's items in the accompanying newsletter, which is linked in the show notes. If you enjoyed the episode, then don't forget to hit the heart button or the thumbs up and subscribe for more Threads of Conversation. You can find more episodes on Substack, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or pretty much anywhere else you get your podcasts.